8-year-old black boy stuns judge with his legal knowledge, shocking the entire jury. The silence in the Brooklyn courtroom was broken when Marcus Johnson, just 8 years old, stood up from his chair and asked permission to speak. The boy held a makeshift folder full of papers and notes, his determined eyes contrasting with his small stature before the imposing court. "Your Honor, I would like to make a statement in defense of my grandmother," said the boy in a firm voice that echoed through the silent room. Judge William Carter stopped writing and looked up over his glasses. In his 30-year career, he had never witnessed anything like this. At the jury table, some members looked at each other with expressions ranging from curiosity to obvious discomfort. Dorothy Johnson, 72, was accused of misappropriating funds from the Bedford-Stuyvesant Neighborhood Housing Program. The amount was considerable, $75,000, which had simply disappeared from the coffers of the community organization she had run for 15 years. "Young man, you should be in school," said the judge with a forced half-smile, trying to be kind in the unusual situation. "I know, sir, but my grandmother has heart problems and can't get upset. Her lawyer dropped the case yesterday because he found out he wasn't going to get paid," Marcus replied, his voice echoing a maturity disturbing for his age. A murmur spread through the room. David Richardson, the prosecutor in charge of the case, rolled his eyes in obvious irritation. He was an elegant man in his 50s, known for his 95% conviction rate in cases involving financial fraud. "Your Honor, this is a complete irregularity. A child cannot represent anyone in court," Richardson protested, adjusting his expensive tie with ill-concealed disdain. "I don't want to represent anyone, sir," Marcus replied, turning to the prosecutor with impressive politeness. "I just want to tell the truth. My grandmother taught me that the truth always wins, even when it seems impossible." Judge Carter leaned forward, intrigued. There was something about the boy's determination that touched him deeply, but also an uncomfortable awareness that all eyes in the room were watching a black child trying to navigate a system that historically did not favor people like him. "Very well, Marcus. You have 5 minutes to speak, but only as a witness," the judge ruled, ignoring Richardson's silent protest. Marcus took a deep breath and opened his folder. The papers were organized with a precision that caught the attention of everyone present. There were newspaper clippings, photocopies of official documents, and even drawings made by the boy himself to illustrate important points. "Your Honor, I've lived with my grandmother since my parents died in an accident 2 years ago. She has always been the administrator of the housing program, and I always helped her check the bills every Sunday night at the kitchen table." Richardson prepared to object again, but something in the boy's determined gaze made him hesitate. It was as if this child knew exactly what he was doing. "Every Sunday, Grandma Dorothy would spread all the papers on the table and let me sort the receipts by color, blue for expenses, yellow for income. It was our special time together," Marcus continued, his voice beginning to tremble slightly, but he quickly regained his composure. As everyone in the courtroom watched with a mixture of condescension and curiosity, Marcus maintained a posture that suggested something much deeper than a simple desperate attempt to help his grandmother. His eyes revealed a serenity that only exists in those who have weathered much worse storms and learned that true strength doesn't shout, it acts. If this story of injustice and determination touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how an 8-year-old boy turned a courtroom full of prejudice into the stage for the most unexpected justice Brooklyn has ever seen. Richardson couldn't hide his contempt. To him, the scene was a pathetic waste of time, a black child trying to save a corrupt old woman with cheap emotional theater. In September, 3 weeks before the money went missing, Grandma Dorothy noticed that someone had been tampering with her housing program account without authorization, Marcus continued, showing a plain school notebook. "She wrote everything down here." The prosecutor stood up abruptly. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. We are wasting time with the fantasies of a child who has clearly been coached by the defendant herself." "Mr. Richardson, you can speak later if you wish," Marcus replied with a politeness that surprised some of the jurors. "My grandmother always taught me to let people finish speaking." The truth was more complex than anyone in the room imagined. Dorothy Johnson had dedicated 15 years of her life to the housing program that helped low-income families find decent housing in Brooklyn. She worked without pay, driven only by the conviction that every child deserved a safe home. 2 years earlier, when Marcus lost his parents in a car accident, Dorothy did not hesitate to take custody of her grandson. The boy arrived traumatized, blaming himself for his parents' death. They were returning from his school performance when they were struck by a drunk driver. For months, Marcus refused to speak. Dorothy spent entire nights sitting by his bed, reading aloud court cases and legal documents she brought home from her volunteer work helping neighbors with bureaucratic issues. "My little grandson," she would say, "knowledge is the only thing no one can take away from us. When you know how the world works, you'll never feel small in front of anyone again." Marcus became interested in the papers, asking questions about legal terms and procedures. Dorothy discovered that the boy had an impressive memory and a natural ability to understand legal logic that surprised even the lawyers she knew. "Your Honor, may I show you what we found?" Marcus asked, returning to the present. Richardson snorted loudly enough for everyone to hear. "His Excellency, this is a circus. What credibility can a child have in complex financial matters?" "A lot more than you think," Marcus replied, looking directly at the prosecutor. "Especially when that child learned to read legal documents at the age of 6, because it was the only way he could connect with his grandmother after losing his parents." An awkward silence filled the room. Even Richardson seemed momentarily taken aback by the mature response and personal revelation. Marcus approached the judge's bench with a confidence that contrasted dramatically with his age. "Look, on September 12, $2,500 was withdrawn from the account for emergency roof repairs at the community center. But my grandmother took me there the next day, and the roof was perfect." He showed a photo taken with an old cell phone. This photo was taken on September 13th. "As you can see, there are no signs of recent repairs." Richardson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had built his entire case on Dorothy's technical responsibility as administrator, but he hadn't investigated each individual transaction thoroughly. "On September 18th, Marcus continued, another $1,800 for security equipment. But there was never any new equipment at the center. And on September 25th, the withdrawal that caught our attention the most, $3,200 for outside legal counsel." Marcus paused dramatically, his eyes sweeping the room. But Grandma Dorothy never hired any outside lawyers. She always handled legal matters herself, with the help of lawyer friends who worked pro bono. The people in the jury box began to lean forward, paying closer attention. What had started as curiosity was turning into something much more serious. "Dr. Richardson," Marcus said, turning to the prosecutor, "did you verify that these companies that received the payments actually exist?" Richardson hesitated. It was a simple question, but he hadn't done this basic verification. "The investigation focused on the administrator's responsibility," he replied defensively. "I see," Marcus said with a maturity that was disturbing. "So you assumed that Grandma Dorothy was guilty without investigating who actually stole the money." Each new question from Marcus revealed glaring gaps in Richardson's investigation. The prosecutor was beginning to realize that he had completely underestimated the situation, building a superficial case based on prejudices about an elderly black woman managing public funds. But what Richardson didn't know was that every strategic question Marcus asked wasn't the result of luck or childish intuition. For months, the boy had meticulously studied every aspect of the case, with a determination fueled not only by his love for his grandmother, but by the absolute certainty that the system would try to destroy yet another innocent black family. Each new revelation only strengthened something inside Marcus that his oppressors couldn't see, a silent force fueled by the very injustice they sought to impose, as if each act of contempt were writing its own sentence of defeat. "And there's something strange about these transactions," Marcus continued, pulling another envelope from the folder. "They were all signed by Grandma Dorothy, but she never signed any of these." Marcus showed several sheets comparing signatures. I learned about handwriting analysis at the public library. Even a kid like me can see they're different. Look, Grandma's real signature has softer strokes, and these are done with really heavy pressure. Richardson rolled his eyes dramatically. Now we're going to accept handwriting analysis done by a child? That's absolutely ridiculous. Dr. Richardson, Marcus replied with impressive politeness, do you have any professional handwriting analysis to prove that these signatures are genuine? The prosecutor hesitated. This was another basic check he hadn't done. The investigation focused on the most relevant aspects of the case. I see, Marcus said. So you have no proof that Grandma Dorothy actually signed these documents. As Richardson struggled to formulate a response, Marcus continued with a confidence that left everyone stunned. For the past 2 months, since he had learned of the charges, the boy had turned his nights into intensive study sessions. The truth was that Marcus wasn't doing it alone. Mrs. Patricia Williams, a retired librarian and former paralegal, had become his secret mentor. Patricia had worked for 30 years in law firms and immediately recognized the boy's potential when he showed up at the library asking for books on legal procedure. Marcus, Patricia had said 2 weeks earlier, you have an exceptional legal mind. But we need to be strategic. In court, they're going to try to disqualify you because you're a child. You need to be 3 steps ahead of them. Together, they had developed a meticulous presentation. Patricia taught Marcus about the order of evidence, how to ask questions that expose flaws in the investigation, and most importantly, how to remain calm in the face of condescending opponents. But the most important discovery is here, Marcus said, pulling out an official document. This is a report from the bank showing that on the day the money disappeared, someone called the account at 2:30 p.m. The call lasted 15 minutes. Marcus showed another piece of paper. And this is the medical record from Brooklyn Methodist Hospital proving that at that exact time, Grandma Dorothy was with me in the emergency room. I was having an asthma attack, and she was there from 1 to 5 p.m. A murmur ran through the room. It was the first concrete and irrefutable evidence that Dorothy could not have made the transaction. Richardson stood up nervously. Your Honor, these documents were not presented during the discovery phase. Dr. Richardson, Marcus replied, did you present any evidence proving that Grandma Dorothy was present when the money was stolen? Another awkward silence. Richardson had built his entire case on Dorothy's technical responsibility without ever verifying that she was physically present at the time of the crime. Furthermore, Marcus continued, did you check the security cameras in the building where the housing program office is located? Richardson was starting to sweat. The cameras weren't working that day. Interesting, Marcus said with calculated innocence. Because I called the security company last week, and they told me the cameras were working perfectly. They even offered to give me the recordings for free to help Grandma Dorothy. The room erupted in murmurs. Richardson realized he was being systematically dismantled by an 8-year-old who had done basic investigative work he had neglected. How did you get this information? Richardson asked, his voice betraying a mixture of anger and desperation. It's simple, Marcus replied. When you love someone, you do whatever it takes to protect them. I've spent the last 2 months studying this case every day after school. Dorothy, who had remained silent until then, began to cry quietly. Her 8-year-old grandson was fighting for her with a determination and intelligence she had never imagined possible. Judge Carter leaned forward, clearly impressed. Marcus, how did you learn to organize evidence like this? Mrs. Patricia from the library helped me. She worked in law offices for 30 years and said that everyone deserves a fair defense, even when they can't afford one. Richardson realized he had completely underestimated the situation. This wasn't just a desperate child trying to save his grandmother. It was a strategic duo that had investigated the case more thoroughly than his own team. But I have one last piece of evidence, Marcus said, his voice growing more serious. The most important one of all. He took a sealed envelope from his briefcase. Inside this envelope is proof of who really stole the money from the housing program. Grandma Dorothy and I discovered the truth, but we wanted to give the real culprit a chance to confess first. Marcus looked directly at Richardson. Doctor, would you like to withdraw the charges against Grandma Dorothy before I open this envelope? Richardson hesitated. He had built his career on the conviction that he was always right, but now he faced the possibility that he had accused an innocent woman based on prejudice and negligent investigation. For a moment, as Marcus held the sealed envelope in his small hands, everyone in the courtroom felt they were about to witness something extraordinary. But anyone watching closely could see that it wasn't nervousness that made the boy's hands tremble slightly. It was the contained power of someone who was about to rewrite not only his own history, but that of everyone in the room. Richardson hesitated, sweat beginning to form beads on his forehead. I can't drop charges based on blackmail from a child. Marcus calmly opened the envelope and removed a digital recording. Dr. Richardson, do you remember this phone conversation from September 15th? He pressed play. Richardson's unmistakable voice echoed through the room. Tony, I need you to speed up this case with the old woman on welfare. It doesn't matter if she's guilty or not. My conviction rate can't drop before the Attorney General's election. A deafening silence fell over the courtroom. Another man's voice answered on the recording. Rick, are you sure? What if they find out we didn't investigate properly? Who's going to find out? It's a poor old black woman against me. The jury's already decided before they even walk in the room. The faces on the jury contorted in expressions of shock and revulsion. Richardson turned pale, realizing that his career had just been publicly destroyed. This is inadmissible. Richardson shouted, standing up abruptly. That recording was obtained illegally. Actually, Marcus said with impressive calm, it was obtained legally. Mrs. Patricia taught me about recording laws. This conversation took place on the public office phone, which has clear notices about recording for transparency purposes. Judge Carter was visibly shaken. In his 3 decades on the bench, he had never witnessed such an exposure of procedural misconduct. Marcus continued, Dr. Richardson, do you also remember this message you sent to Tony 3 days later? He showed a printout of the text. The investigation needs to focus solely on the administrator's responsibility. I don't want any detectives wasting time checking companies or signatures. Case closed in 2 weeks, maximum. Indignant murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Jurors looked at each other with expressions of disgust. Richardson's conduct was not just negligent, it was deliberately corrupt. But the most important evidence, said Marcus, is in this document. He showed a bank statement. This is Dr. Richardson's personal account statement. On October 2nd, 3 days after Grandma Dorothy was charged, he received a deposit of $25,000 from a shell company. Richardson tried to speak, but his voice came out as a desperate whisper. That's the same company that received some of the fraudulent payments from the housing program, Marcus added. You weren't just neglecting the investigation, Doctor. You were protecting your accomplices. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Richardson had fallen into his own trap. Not only had he accused an innocent woman, but he was directly involved in the corruption scheme. Mrs. Patricia taught me something important, Marcus said, looking directly at Richardson. She said that people like you always make the same mistake. You think you can step on those you consider weaker without consequences. Dorothy, who had remained silent throughout the presentation, slowly stood up. Dr. Richardson, for 15 years I have dedicated my life to helping families find decent housing. You tried to destroy that for money and political ambition. Richardson hung his head, completely defeated. His reputation, career, and political future had been obliterated by an 8-year-old he had completely underestimated. Marcus, Judge Carter said, his voice shaking with emotion, in my 30 years on the bench, I have never seen a presentation of evidence as thorough as yours. Thank you, Your Honor. But I just wanted to clear Grandma Dorothy's name and ensure that true justice was served. The judge turned to the prosecutor. Mr. Richardson, In addition to the charges against Dorothy Johnson being immediately dismissed, I am ordering that this case be referred for investigation of prosecutorial misconduct and corruption." Richardson tried to stand up to protest, but he staggered. His arrogance had turned to sheer panic when he realized that not only would he lose the case, but he would face a criminal investigation. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "I want everyone to know that I didn't do this out of revenge. I did it for the love of Grandma Dorothy and because every child deserves to see that justice is possible, even when it seems impossible." The courtroom erupted in spontaneous applause. Several jurors had tears in their eyes, not only for Dorothy's proven innocence, but for the powerful demonstration that intelligence and determination can overcome privilege and corruption. As the applause echoed through the courtroom and Richardson was escorted out by security, one question remained. Could it be that this 8-year-old boy had planted seeds of change that would grow far beyond those four walls, transforming not only his life but inspiring an entire generation to believe that age, color, or background never define the size of the dreams we can achieve? 6 months after the trial that changed Brooklyn, Marcus was sitting in the front row of the city's law school, not as a student, but as a guest speaker. At age 9, he had become the most famous civil procedure case study of the past 10 years. True justice, Marcus told an audience of 300 future lawyers, doesn't happen when you defeat someone. It happens when you protect those you love and teach others to do the same. In the front row, Dorothy smiled proudly. Her health had improved dramatically since the stress of the charges ended. The housing program, now under new transparent management, had received record donations from people inspired by the Johnson family's story of integrity. Richardson, on the other hand, faced a very different reality. After a federal investigation, he had been convicted of corruption, prosecutorial misconduct, and fraud. He lost his license to practice law, faced 2 years in prison, and now worked as an insurance salesman in a small town where no one knew of his shameful past. "People ask me if I feel sorry for Dr. Richardson," Marcus continued during the lecture. "I do feel sorry for him, sorry for someone who had so much privilege and decided to use it to hurt innocent people." Mrs. Patricia, now officially Marcus' mentor through a university program, was in the audience. Together, they had created a project that taught children from underserved communities about their basic legal rights. The Marcus Project was now operating in 25 Brooklyn public schools, teaching hundreds of children that they had a voice and power. "Marcus taught us something fundamental," said the college dean during the presentation. "That knowledge without character is dangerous, but character with knowledge can change the world." Marcus's life had been completely transformed. 3 large law firms had already offered him full scholarships for when he reached college age. The national media covered his story, but Dorothy always protected her grandson from excessive spotlight, ensuring that he remained a normal child. The case had inspired significant legislative changes. A bill known as the Marcus Law was passed in New York State, requiring prosecutors to present concrete evidence of the defendant's physical presence at the time of the crime in cases of grand larceny. Other states began to consider similar legislation. At the end of the lecture, a student raised her hand. "Marcus, are you going to be a lawyer when you grow up?" "I don't know yet," he replied with the same honesty he had always shown. "But I know I want to continue helping people understand that they have more power than they realize." Dorothy, now recognized as Brooklyn Citizen of the Year, used her new platform to advocate for reforms in the welfare system. She had been invited to join a city council that oversaw social programs, ensuring transparency and efficiency. "My grandson taught me that our age does not define our wisdom," she said in interviews on national television. "And our color does not define our ability. Sometimes justice needs to be reminded of its own principles." Richardson tried several times to contact Dorothy to apologize in person, even sending letters from prison. She refused all contact, but not out of spite. She had simply moved on to bigger and more important things. "Some wounds," she told Marcus during a conversation, "don't need forgiveness for us to move on. They need justice, and we've got justice." In the courtroom where it all happened, Judge Carter had framed the photo from the day of the trial and kept it on his desk as a reminder that true justice can come from the most unexpected places. He became more rigorous in his review of evidence presented by prosecutors, always citing the Johnson case as an example of due process. Marcus remained a normal child, playing basketball at school, watching cartoons on Sundays, and getting into mischief typical of any 9-year-old. But he carried with him a wisdom about justice and determination that impressed adults across the country. The Bedford-Stuyvesant community had been transformed. The housing program now served as a national model, and Dorothy was invited to consult in other cities. Marcus often accompanied her, always carrying his organized binder, now famous among lawyers and law students. During one of these trips, a reporter asked Marcus what his biggest lesson from the case was. "I learned that when you're right and you don't give up, the system can be fair. But you have to be prepared to prove you're right." Mrs. Patricia, watching Marcus answer questions with maturity, later commented, "This boy didn't just save his grandmother. He restored my faith that the next generation can fix what our generation broke." The story had set a precedent that other cases followed. Lawyers began citing the Johnson precedent in cases involving procedural misconduct, and law schools included the case in their professional ethics curricula. "The difference between being a victim and being a winner," Marcus always said when asked about his secret, "is not what happens to you, but what you decide to do next. Grandma Dorothy taught me that knowledge is power, but love is courage." Richardson tried to destroy an innocent family, but ended up destroying only himself, while Marcus and Dorothy emerged stronger, inspiring an entire generation of children to believe that their voices matter. The Johnson family's story proved that age does not define ability, color does not limit potential, and that when love meets knowledge, miracles can happen even in the most unlikely places. Marcus had planted seeds of change that would grow far beyond that courtroom, transforming not only his life but inspiring an entire generation to believe that justice is possible. If this story of justice and overcoming adversity has touched your heart, subscribe to the channel to discover more real stories that prove that the best revenge is not destroying those who hurt you, but building something so great that they could never imagine. What about you? Have you ever had to fight for someone you love against a system that seemed impossible to beat? Leave your own story of determination in the comments. Because as Marcus taught us, every child, and every adult, has more power than they realize when they decide that justice is worth fighting for. Sometimes, true revolution doesn't happen with shouting or violence, but with an 8-year-old boy, an organized folder, and the unshakable belief that truth and love always win in the end.